Panel of the afternoon. We'll be talking about politics and youth involvement in politics and political activism. Our first presentation will be from Mark Gabriel Vagan Aguilar from the Southern Philippine Academy College and the Calayan Educational Foundation. The title of his presentation is Generational Perspectives Towards Premature Campaigning and Its Perceived Influence on Voting Preferences. Thank you.
All right. A great afternoon to all delegates and presenters at this conference. First, I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the organizing committee, the Youth Research Institute of Matthias Corvinus Collegium, COSONUM, for having me here and giving me this very rare opportunity. Also, please accept my advance congratulations for successfully organizing this momentous event. Today, I will be presenting my study on premature campaigning and its influence on voting preferences. Particularly, it has involved people from various generations with an aim to get to know and understand their attitude, their behavior, their perspective towards political and electoral processes. This way, we would be able to have a grasp on how they think when choosing a political candidate to vote for, be able to understand and explain their differences, and develop interventions on how we could better implement electoral policies and make changes if necessary. So on this note, allow me to proceed to the rationale of the study. In the Philippines, where I came from, we have a law that governs elections. It was enacted in 1985, and in our native tongue, it is called Batas Pambansa Bilang 881, but in English, it is called Republic Act Number 881, also known as the Omnibus Election Code of the Philippines. Under Section 80 in particular, the law prohibits premature campaigning. I quote, "It shall be unlawful for any person, whether or not a voter or candidate, or for any party or association of persons, to engage in an election campaign or partisan political activity except during official campaign period, provided that political parties may hold political conventions or meetings to nominate their official candidates within 30 days before the commencement of the campaign period and 45 days for presidential and vice presidential election. However, it remains widespread in the Philippines, often starting a year or more before elections. This year, for example, political candidates or assumed political candidates began displaying their faces in public spaces over a year before the 2025 midterm election in May. In fact, it is so rampant, it has prompted widespread discussion on social media. So my friends, these are some premature campaign materials that are currently posted on public places all over the Philippines of assumed political candidates. I keep on saying assumed because they are not yet officially declared, simply because it's not yet campaign period. So these are assumed candidates. Some of them are already known by their surnames, while some are emerging politicians. Maybe you wonder, what are the common contents of these campaign materials if they are not yet officially declared as candidates? The common contents of posters posted earlier than the official campaign period is actually not necessarily telling voters to vote for politicians. Rather, are greetings and reminders to the public. There are posters saying, "Safe travels." Several politicians congratulate board top-notchers. There are also politicians who congratulate graduates of degree programs from university and colleges, while there are also those who just want people to know that they are planning to run for a certain position by putting designations next to their names. For example, this one, her name is Sol Aragones. But if you notice, there is Gov before her name. Gov is like a short term for governor. This one, his name is Pee-wee Perez, but there is Vice Gov prior to his name, because Vice Gov is like a short term or an abbreviation for Vice Governor. So through this, they intend to inform the public that they will be eyeing for a certain position. But if we are going to analyze it, they are not governors. They're not yet vice governors, not senators, among others yet. They are already putting the designations next to their names. It may make people wonder, why do candidates, or why do political candidates rather, engage in this kind of activity? Based on literature, the more people are exposed to something, the more they tend to like it. This is called the mere exposure effect, which is a psychological phenomenon by which people tend to develop a preference or things or people that are more familiar to them than others, that is caused by repeated exposure. And people are often unaware of this effect's influence on them. And this perfectly applies in politics, as constant exposure to a candidate, even if it's largely negative, can have a positive impact. Now, let us define what premature campaigning is. Because in my country, the Philippines, over the years, there has been confusion on what the term really means, or where does the term really applies. According to the Omnibus Election Code of the Philippines, campaign period for presidential and vice presidential election is 90 days. For the House of Representatives, the Senate, and local elections, which is up to mayoral level, I'm talking about city level, municipality level, is 45 days. While in the town level is 15 days. So these days are all before the election date. So basically, this suggests that what constitutes as premature campaigning are campaign activities that are conducted earlier than this. In fact, among voters, this has been very clear. However, there is a confusion among implementers. To provide you context, in past elections, complaints were filed at the Commission on Elections against politicians engaging in this practice. Although things have started to change this year, confusion persists regarding the Commission's stance on premature campaigning, particularly evident during the 2022 national elections. As presented on this slide, the Commission contends that political figures are only liable for electoral violations such as premature campaigning once they officially file their candidacy and are declared as candidates. And this typically happens months before election period. So basically, with what the Commission has said, before the filing of candidacy and the declaration of official candidates, people that are planning to run are not governed by electoral policies. This also suggests that these individuals can engage in premature campaigning and do whatever they want without legal repercussions until they are officially declared as official candidates. My friends, this is probably why it is rampant in the Philippines despite having a law that clearly prohibits it. So right now, before I proceed with the objectives of the research that I did, I would like to clarify that despite potential benefits, its prevalence, and the confusion that persists, premature campaigning remains illegal in the Philippines and is punishable by law. In fact, guilt will result in disqualification. And if in case the verdict was presented after the politician has been elected, he will be removed from office. Additionally, those who engage in this practice, since they violate electoral policies, face concerns about their suitability for office. With this, registered voters, as the decision makers on who to put as nation leaders, particularly in the Philippines being a democracy, it is crucial to understand the perspective on premature campaigning to determine its influence and their potential biases towards politicians. This understanding, aside from developing an idea on how people's minds work in politics, is essential for safeguarding the integrity of the electoral process and ensuring that candidates are held accountable for their actions, or at least be able to experience the implications of their decisions. Now, motivated by this premise, I did this research with the following objectives. So basically, I have aimed to determine people's stances on premature campaigning, probing whether they consider the practice acceptable or not. I have aimed to find out the underlying reasons behind these opinions. I have also attempted to determine whether the voting decision of majority of people are positively or negatively influenced by premature campaigning. And lastly, I was able to differentiate people's stances, the practice influence on voting preference, and people's bias based on their demographic profile, particularly generation or age. Okay, so for the methodology, this study was guided by a descriptive mixed method, a mixed method concurrent research design considering the qualitative and quantitative nature of it. The scope was within Region 4A in the Philippines. So yeah, this is a regional study, and it has involved total of 307 Filipino respondents who are at least 15 years of age and are registered voters to date. So let me explain why 15 years old. Because maybe in some other countries, the minimum age so that you can vote is 18. In the Philippines, it's 15. Why? Because we have the youth leaders in the town level. So they, the qualification starts from 15 years old to be a youth leader in the town level. And these are seen as the future mayors, future governors, or even president of the country. Because that's why 15 years old were included in the study. So data gathering was done through the utilization of online questionnaires, and I also did face-to-face interview in which initial communication took place via social media, phone calls, and exchanges of emails. To analyze data collected, frequencies and percentages were computed, thematic analysis was done, and differentiation and correlation were performed through statistical tests such as chi-square and Pearson correlation. Questions that were asked to respondents were, is premature campaigning acceptable or unacceptable to them? That's the first question. For those who find it acceptable, they were asked the question, if they don't favor a politician and this politician engages in premature campaigning, would they change their minds? And will there be a possibility for them voting for that politician come election date? Meanwhile, those who find the practice unacceptable were asked the question, if they do favor a politician and this politician engages in premature campaigning, would they change their minds and perceive the politician unfavorable, resulting in not voting for them? So these questions were asked to know whether the practice influences voting decisions, whether the implications of such influence are positive or negative to voting decisions, and whether people have biases. So now let us talk about the results. In general, majority of Filipino voters finds the practice unacceptable, accounting to 67% of the respondents. On the other hand, 33% believes that premature campaigning is tolerable. In terms of its influence on their voting preference, majority or 6 of 10 people have expressed that premature campaigning actually influences their voting decisions come election date, while 38% said otherwise. Data also revealed that the practice influences the voting decisions of 4 out of 10 people with negative implications. These respondents who believe that premature campaigning is acceptable argued that if they don't like a candidate and they engage in premature campaigning, they might consider voting for them eventually after successful introduction of their platforms and their identity. So their voting decisions are influenced, but the implications of that influence is actually negative, because these people would likely vote for candidates who engage in premature campaigning. Meanwhile, 59% will not be influenced into voting. Okay. Moreover, of those who believe that premature campaigning is unacceptable, 2 out of 10 argued that if they like a candidate and that candidate engage in premature campaigning, they will no longer like him or her which indicates that only a small percentage of people are influenced by the practice with positive implications, while 79% are not influenced by the engagement of the politician in the practice, instilling that they will still vote for that politician, translating to bias towards political personalities. Overall, these findings revealed that premature campaigning is likely to influence people's voting preference with negative implications. Furthermore, the data means that engaging in premature campaigning does not matter to people despite perceiving it as not acceptable. In fact, it gives an advantage to favored candidates come election. It is, however, important to note that those who find the practice acceptable are also biased, because they express that if they dislike a candidate and this candidate engages in premature campaigning, their perception will not change, which means that although the practice could be effective in keeping the support of people who find certain candidates favorable, premature campaigning may not be that effective in changing the minds of those who dislike them prior election period. Okay. Lastly, pertaining to this data, combining the percentages of both groups, the voters who believe that the practice is unacceptable and those who believe otherwise, it was revealed that 6 out of 10 Filipinos are biased towards political personalities, while 31% considers engagement in premature campaigning in their voting decisions. Okay, moving on. These were the themes that have emerged from the responses pertaining to why there are people who find premature campaigning as acceptable. Emerging as the top reason is information and awareness. Many respondents believe that premature campaigning helps voters become familiar with candidates and their platforms ahead of time. They argue that the official campaign period is not enough for them to get to know aspiring politicians, needing or necessitating earlier campaign activities. Additionally, although a violation of a law, they argued that this helps in gathering information about assumed candidates, resulting in making informed decisions during elections. Transparency and accountability was also a premise on why people argued that the practice is acceptable to them. Several respondents mentioned that premature campaigning allows candidates to showcase their intentions and advocacies early on, which in turn helps voters to assess candidates and holds them accountable for their promises. Another argument from these people falls within the context of tradition and habit, which I pity. I'm actually sad with this result. Some respondents mentioned that premature campaigning has become a customary practice in Philippine politics, and they view it as something that happens regularly before elections and consider it acceptable within that context. We are already used to it. It has been happening. Let's just go with the flow. Basically, that is their perspective. That is one of the reasons of some respondents. Accessibility and reminder is also a reason. Some express that premature campaigning serves as a reminder to voters about upcoming elections. So they're not talking about being reminded on who will run, rather being reminded that there is an upcoming election. And lastly, some people argued within the premise of preparation and strategy. There were respondents who believed that premature campaigning is a strategic move for candidates to gain visibility and recognition among voters, particularly those that are not known yet and those that do not have much resources compared to their opponents. Okay, on the other hand, these were the themes that have emerged from the responses pertaining to why people find premature campaigning not acceptable. The top reason is violation of campaigning regulations, which already speaks for itself, since premature campaigning is really prohibited, it's really illegal in the country. Next is perceived environmental impact. I'm also happy to find out that although we're talking about politics, we're talking about voting decisions, some respondents were mindful about these political materials' impact to the environment. They were concerned about environmental pollution and visual clutter because in the Philippines, we really cannot control the distribution of campaign materials such as stickers, posters, tarpaulins during the official campaign period. What more if there will be posters that will be posted and distributed prior that election period? Another argument is unfair advantage. Actually, with this reason, unfair advantage, the reason of those who find the practice unacceptable is really invalidating the reasons given by those who find the practice acceptable. Those people who think that premature campaigning is unacceptable argued that it creates an unfair advantage for well-funded candidates who can afford extensive early campaigning and an obvious disadvantage to those with fewer financial resources. Okay, some people also express that premature campaigning can distract elected officials from their duties and responsibilities because there are officials that are planning to run for re-election. So instead of doing their jobs as government officials, they seem to focus on the re-election run on the last year or the last few months within their term of office. Manipulation and mind controlling is also a reason. Some respondents expressed concerns about the psychological impact of premature campaigning, suggesting that it manipulates or conditions voters' minds before the official campaign period. There are also voters who said that premature campaigning fails to respect voters' intelligence by assuming that early exposure will sway their opinions towards, sway their opinions before they have fully considered their choices. And lastly, disrespect to current officials. Like what I've shown you earlier, there are politicians or people planning to run that already put designations next to their names. So they are already, it seems like they're already assuming that they're going to win, that they will become governors, they'll become senators because they have put the designation already with their names. So for some voters, it's like disrespect to those who are currently in office. Okay, so let us now proceed with the differentiation results. Based on the data, it is noticeable that among the 4 generations, baby boomers are the most problematic in terms of the issue of premature campaigning. Although the difference is not significant, they still favor the practice most, despite it being a violation of the election code. And unfortunately, they're also the most influenced, which means that premature campaigning is most effective in making their perspective favorable towards a candidate, which is a bad thing. Following baby boomers are millennials, as most problematic in terms of their stance on the practice and its influence on their voting preference, with 49% of them being convinced by engagement in premature campaigning to vote for political candidates. This means that the mere exposure effect, although within the premise of an illegal activity, is most effective among baby boomers and millennials. Data also revealed that the majority, or 6 to 7 of 10 Gen Zs, find the practice not acceptable, and it influences their voting preference. Recording the highest percentage in terms of positive influence, 67.5% of Gen Zs express that if they like a candidate and this candidate engage in premature campaigning, they won't favor the candidate anymore come election, which translates to strong opposition against political candidates who violate electoral policies. Following Gen Zs are Gen Xs, as least problematic in terms of the practice influence on voting preference. Most of Gen Xs finds premature campaigning the same as Gen Zs, which is not acceptable and is influenced by the practice the closest way as well, specifically in terms of the impact of premature campaigning to favoring political personalities. These two generational groups tend to change their perspectives depending on a political personality's engagement in premature campaigning. Now let us talk about bias. The data revealed that millennials, by the way, I am a millennial, so I'm not biased with the results. They actually have the greatest bias towards politicians. It was determined that although the majority of them finds the practice unacceptable, they have the highest percentage among all generational groups who express that they are not influenced by the practice, revealing an alarming bias. 46% of millennials who finds the practice unacceptable express that they will still vote for a candidate they favor despite engaging in premature campaigning. They are followed by Gen Xs with 46 as well, but it is important to note that data only suggested that Gen Xs are biased because of their stance on candidates that they dislike. Compared with other generational groups, most Gen Xs who finds premature campaigning acceptable, despite having such stance, do not get influenced by it, as their dislike towards a candidate remains until election. So if they don't like you, whatever you do, although they find election or campaign, premature campaigning acceptable, they won't change their mind. They will still not vote for you. So in a way, that's still bias. Okay, meanwhile, garnering the least percentage in terms of bias, only 3 of 10 baby boomers express that if they favor a candidate and this candidate engages in premature campaigning, their perception towards this candidate remains favorable, compared to Gen Z with 42% and millennials with 46%. So overall, these findings indicate that while baby boomers are the most influenced by an illegal activity into voting, millennials have the tendency to be the most tolerable of the practice since they care the least and they are just focused on the political candidate that they are supporting compared to other groups. Furthermore, the least problematic are Gen Zs in terms of influence of premature campaigning to voting preference since they don't vote for practice engagers, while it is baby boomers in terms of bias towards political personalities. Another important thing to consider with this data is that the data or the results of the study seems to say that in terms of voting decisions or electoral behavior, the closest thing to baby boomers are millennials, being the most influenced by political activities, particularly those grounded to the mere exposure effect premise. And they are also the least considerate to policies as well. While the closest thing to Gen X's are Gen Z, being the least influenced, particularly in terms of negative influence or negative implications, and the most that pays attention to the adherence of candidates to political or electoral policies. This is actually supported by a research conducted by Hook Research Limited in 2019, which argued that Gen X's and Gen Z's are the closest with each other in terms of personalities and decisions. And another study that was posted in boomagain.com also supports that baby boomers and millennials are the closest thing with each other. So if you're going to look at the case, it seems like generational perspective in terms of politics is like a cycle. It's like a cycle. It's not continuous. It's not continuously decreasing. It's not continuously increasing. It's like a cycle. Like if baby boomers perceive it this way, the next generation will see it the other way. Then the third will see it the same as the first one, and the fourth will see it same with the second one. So it's like a cycle, not continuous. Okay. Lastly, it is important to note that although there has been improvement in the voting practice of people over the years, provided that younger generations seems to have a better or a more logical reason for voting or more logical voting decision, there is still a number of the youth of today who disregard electoral policies and have bias towards political candidates. In fact, it was revealed in this study that overall, 31% or 3 of every 10 Gen Zs believe that the practice is acceptable. Although this does not necessarily mean that their voting preference are influenced by it. While 32.5% of Gen Zs who thinks premature campaigning is unacceptable are biased, expressing that if they find a candidate favorable, despite engaging in premature campaigning, they would still vote for them. So, although majority speaking, Gen Z's electoral perspective is good, there's still a number that are problematic. Okay, in terms of other demographics, because aside from differentiating the perspectives in terms of generations or age, I've also differentiated in terms of sexuality, educational attainment, and income or monthly income. So in terms of other demographics, there's actually no significant difference. So basically, we cannot use sexuality, educational attainment, and income to predict how voters decide on who to vote for. So Okay, I'm about to finish. My apologies. So here are the key takeaways. So yeah, basically this is just a summary of all that I have discussed earlier for your reference. So there you go. I'm not going to read it anymore. So, and these are the recommendations. Sorry for going over time. These are the recommendations. Perhaps I'll just finish the study and I'll publish it in the YRI journal so that everybody can see the complete version of it. So this ends my presentation. Again, my sincere gratitude goes to the Youth Research Institute of MCC Hungary. It is an honor for me to be part of this endeavor, and I hope that this will be the beginning of the development of a genuine relationship or friendship between you and me. Kozonom from the bottom of my heart, and I am looking forward to welcoming you in the Philippines soon. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you very much. We have 2 more presentations within this sphere. The next one is from Xiao Li from the Sciences Po University in Paris. Its title is Youth Mobilization in European Politics, Understanding the Rising Participation Trend in European Parliament Elections Among Younger Generations. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Chao Li, a PhD candidate in the Center for European Studies and Cooperative Politics at Sciences Po Paris. It's my pleasure today to share the results of the paper, Youth Mobilization in European Politics. And this paper is particularly about to identifying the reasons behind the observation of an increasing turnout trend in European Parliament elections, particularly among younger citizens in Western Europe. So starting with the background, so as you already know, the 2019 European Parliament election witnessed the first-time reversal of the downward trend in turnout over time. And this is contrary to scholarly expectation of a continuous decline in voter turnout. So immediate analysis of the 2019 European Parliament election shows that contributing factor to this increased turnout come from more participation from younger citizens particularly in Western Europe. While we understand quite extensively about the factors that might influence, encourage, or discourage voter turnout, we know relatively little what are the factors that actually caused are associated with this increased turnout in supranational elections among younger citizens. So this paper that I try to do is precisely to identify, to examine different types of explanation that focusing on the shifting cohort dynamics that may be accounted for the surge in turnout patterns observed among younger citizens. So in the literature, over the past century, we kind of see a continuous decline in voter turnout. And this is not only in European Parliament elections, but also in national elections nearly everywhere, particularly in advanced democracies. And in the literature, we kind of see this marked turnout decrease among pre- and post-baby boomers. So similar analysis have been conducted in numerous countries over the continent and across the globe, and also in previous European Parliament elections until the 2009. And particular scholars have been particularly interested in identifying the reason why there is a general decline in turnout. And they point to some factors related to weaker sense of civic duty, a reduced sense of political efficacy, a weaker sense of political engagement, political knowledge, and political interest. Some of them point to a more general factors, such as the declining likelihood to participate in association, to have a growing distrust towards institutes, or have a weaker strength of partisanship. So younger citizens may be less likely to identify with a particular party, thus have a relatively lower participation rate compared to previous generations. But, sorry. Okay, so, so here you can see this is a decline, a reversing pattern in European Parliament elections. So I try to particularly to understand what is the reason behind this decline. And here you can see overall the turnout has been declined nearly everywhere. And previous analysis has shown that it may be linked to a weaker sense of civic duty, political efficacy, and other factors related to politics, or more general factors related to party memberships, discharge, partisanship. Okay, so going to the theoretical framework, it's mostly based on the theory of political socialization. So in the literature, we think that the important period is the formative year. So during the period from late adolescence to early adulthood, it is a particular period where attitudes, opinion, predisposition of developed, shape, and finally stabilize. And we normally link the generational differences to changing socialization context during the formative years. So based on this theory, I would argue that the sources of generational differences in terms of EU-related attitudes and perception are linked to the changing socialization context during the formative years. So particularly such as the widened policy scope of the EU during the period, the increased saliences of European issues and Europeanization of European Parliament elections throughout a series of daunting European crises. And some evidence in the literature had already shows a changing attitudes among younger citizens, such as the increasing support for the European election, for the European Union. And focusing on the 2019 European Parliament elections, the survey has shown that younger citizens report that they participate in this election particularly out of a sense of European identity, or because they think that voting can actually make things change in European Parliament elections. And also, they are convinced by the election campaign during the European elections. So my hypothesis is relatively simple, is that I think that the increased voting probability in European Parliament elections among younger citizens may be explained partly by positive attitudes toward the EU and or favorable perception of the EU and the European Parliament elections, or they may be linked to a greater exposure to the election campaign. Okay. So for the data that I use two sources of data. The European election studies from 1999 to 2019, so over 2 decades. And the other data set, I mix post-electoral waves of Eurobarometer with the 2014 European election studies. So there are 2 data sets that I use. And the reason that I use 2 sources of data is that the European election studies offer a detailed snapshot of the European Parliament elections, while the Eurobarometer, there are more variables that are linked to attitudes toward the EU perception of the elections. So with mixing the 2, we can examine diversity of explanatory variables. And I focus here in 15 Western European countries, previously grouped it as the EU 15. And I didn't include countries from Eastern and Central Europe because previous studies shows differences in turnout patterns across regions. And here, in terms of the statistical model, I use a hierarchical age period cohort analysis. So age period cohort analysis is that we want to distinguish the effects of aging, the effect of a particular year, the effect of being a membership of a particular cohort, so age period cohort analysis. But I use a hierarchical one. That means that, as you probably know, in the APC analysis, we've encountered in statistical model the problems of multicollinearity, because age period cohort are linearly dependent. So if we know a person's age, if we know a particular period, then we know which cohort they belong to, either generation Z, generation X. So the scholar Yang and Land had actually proposed an alternative way to studying isolating the effects of generations. That is through a multi-level modeling structure. So we model the nesting, the contextual factors of being a cohort, of being particular cohorts or in a particular year, at a higher level. So let's say we have the level of city Budapest, and we have the level of country Hungary. So in this model structure, we have two levels as well. In a level that's individual, and the second level is being a particular cohort, being nested in a particular year. So this is multi-level. We have two levels here. And in terms of fixed effects, I include the continuous variable of age and the squared age to account for the curvilinear impact of aging. Because in the survey data, what we observe is that turnout increase when we reach age. So getting married, having children, having a permanent residency. However, it typically reduces in later stage of life, partially because of a weaker social network or perhaps a declining health condition. So there is this curvilinear effect. So I use the continuous age and the square age to control for this effect. And I also include the control variable standard, so like gender, education, occupation status. And I also include more variable in the European election study because there are more variables there. So I furthermore include partisanship, union membership, religious attendance, political interest. These are typical factors that may be associated with turnout. And here, importantly, I try to add in explanatory variables. So these are related to attitudes towards the EU, perceptions, and exposure to the campaign. Lastly, I include country fixed effects and survey fixed effect to control for any potential differences at the country and period level. Okay. So in terms of the classification of generations, I use a relatively general classification that is developed by scholars when studying turnout variation in European Parliament elections. So linking back to my theories, that I think that the 80s generations spent more of its formative years in the post-Maastricht Treaty, during which the policy and geographic scope of the EU dramatically widened during this period. So we have the establishment of the European Central Bank, the introduction of the euro, and furthermore, the 90s or the 2000 generations, though born since 1990s, spent more of its formative years when European issues gained prominency throughout the series of EU crises, so including the sovereign debt crisis emerging into late 2008, the migrant crisis, and Brexit. Okay, so here I have three groups of explanatory variables. So first, EU-related attitudes. I test support for EU membership, trust in EU institutions. Political identity is measured through two variables. So whether citizens agree or not agree with the following statement. You feel you are a citizen of the EU. You feel attached to Europe. In terms of political efficacy in EU politics, I use two survey questions. One, whether or not the respondent agree to the following statement. You had all the necessary information to choose who to vote in for the recent European elections. And another statement, the EP, the European Parliament, takes into account the concerns of European citizens. The second group of variable I test is the perception towards the EU and the European Parliament elections. So in terms of perceived EU competencies, I use the survey question asking citizens, as of today, at which level do you think the most important issues or problem is dealt with? So if citizens respond at the European level, then I code as 1. If they offer all the responses, then I code it as 0. And in terms of importance of European Parliament results, I use two survey questions. Whether or not the respondents agree to the following statement. It is very important for you which particular candidates have been elected as the member of European Parliament in the European Parliament elections. Another statement, it is very important for you to know which particular political parties has the most member of European Parliament in the European Parliament elections. Here, in terms of the results, what we can see is that, Here. In terms of the result, we can see a reversing patterns of turnout in European Parliament elections in Western Europe. the 60 and the 70 generations are particularly less likely to participate in European Parliament elections, while we observe a rising turnout patterns among younger generations. And these results are similar with two different types of data sources. So either from the European election studies or another data set merging European election studies with Eurobarometer. So here, this results serve as a reference point for me to compare how including additional explanatory variable reduce the cohort level variance that we observe. So put it simply, if younger generations are more likely to vote because of more positive attitudes toward the EU, then I would expect that if I additionally control for cohort level differences in terms of how people think towards the EU, then there should be a reduced patterns of rising youth participation. Okay. So for the first part of result that we're focusing on EU-related attitudes, here we can see that support for EU membership, trust in EU institutions does not really help us to understand why younger generations are more likely to vote. While European identity and political efficacy in European politics have been particularly contributing to reduce the rising youth participation that we identify from the multi-level APC models. Secondly, when we focus on explanatory variable related to perception towards the European Union and European Parliament elections, is that we can see that perceived EU competences does not really help us to explain why younger generations are more likely to vote in European Parliament elections. And more importantly, this variable is not statistically significant in the model. So put it simply is that among respondents that perceive EU competences and among those who don't, we didn't see a significant increase in turnout. So this is not a very consistent factors that contribute to understanding turnout in European Parliament elections. However, importances of European Parliament results substantially account for the cohort level variances. And in terms of exposure to the European election campaign, here you can see the comparing two models, the pattern is very, very similar, showing that this is not really a pattern that actually helps to explain why younger generations are more likely to participate in European Parliament elections. They are not more likely to participate in European Parliament elections because they follow closely the media campaign, or because they are encouraged by the European Parliament to vote in European Parliament elections. So here, the conclusion is that this paper, I try to investigate what are some demand-side explanations that can account for the increased youth participation that we observe in European Parliament elections, particularly in Western Europe. And the analysis taken together is that younger generation seems more likely to participate because they have a growing sense of European identity. They feel they are citizens of the EU, they feel attached to Europe, and also a growing sense of political efficacy in EU politics. And lastly, they also are more likely to vote in European Parliament elections because they perceive the results of European Parliament elections as important compared to earlier generations. While support for EU membership, trust in EU institutions only account marginally for the rising youth participation patterns among younger citizens. And what we find not at all support for the hypothesis is that perceived EU competences, media attention to the campaign, exposure to voting campaign, does not really help us to explain why younger citizens nowadays are more likely to vote compared to their generational counterparts. And I think these findings actually challenge the applicability of the second-order election model to youth voting behaviors in European Parliament elections. And in terms of social relevance, I think these findings also tell us how to try to mobilize youth participation in supranational elections. If younger citizens are more likely to vote nowadays, because of a greater sense of EU citizenship or because of they perceive EP electoral result as important, one of the strategies that we can try to do is that we can appeal to younger people's sense of EU citizenship. So to tell them what are the advantages of being a citizen of the EU, but also what are some of the duties, obligations that come with. And also to provide easily understandable profiles of the parties and candidates that participate in European Parliament elections. And thank you for your attention, and I remain available if you have any questions afterwards. Thank you.
All right, and our last presentation for this panel now is from Shalini Garg on youth-led initiatives in cooperative development, and Shalini is from the University of Rajasthan in Jaipur, India. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina. Namaskar and good afternoon, everyone. As an Indian, honored to be in this beautiful city of Budapest, I extend my warmest greetings to each and every one of you. It's a privilege to be here today amidst the rich tapestry of cultures, histories, traditions in this converge of this beautiful city on the Danube River. As we come together to discuss youth-led initiatives in cooperatives, let me introduce you myself. I am Dr. Shalini Garg. I am currently working as an inspector in Department of Cooperatives in Rajasthan state in India. Keen researcher by interest, I am an artist by passion, and I am an administrator by work. More than a decade in my research areas after my post-graduation, I have published more than 7 or 8 papers in different journals. It's in international and national journals, and more than 15 to 16 conference papers. As a general manager of Marketing Cooperative Society, I get to link to many of the people from rural India as well as from urban India who are having problems with the youth and need the guidance in the sector of cooperatives. I received the Best Paper Award for the research topic that is a new and innovative, that's the creative isomorphism. Let's embark on a journey into the world of cooperatives. Now, these are the topics that we have to cover today. Let's imagine you are in a bustling town where the folks are working together, pooling their resources, and sharing in the rewards. That's the essence of cooperatives. Think of it like this. You have a group of people, maybe farmers, artisans, consumers, and these who come together voluntarily to address their common needs. This is the definition given of the cooperatives by the International Cooperative Alliance. Yes, the potential of youth in cooperatives is boundless. A group of energetic, young-minded, eager to make the difference in the communities, that's the driving force behind the cooperatives. Many international organizations, such as International Labour Organizations, United Nations, and International Cooperative Alliance, have also put some words and the statements towards the development of cooperatives and leading a significant part of youth to be contributed in the cooperatives. So there are some recent trends, that is promotion of cooperatives for sustainable development, particularly in the areas of poverty reduction, gender equality, and environmental sustainability. It also provides resilience during the crisis, as we have seen that we have crossed over the COVID-19 pandemic, and the cooperatives have played a major role in the welfare activities for the citizens who are underserved. It provides adaptability, innovation, and support to the members and the communities during the challenging times. It also provides the advocacy for supportive policies through promotion of cooperative entrepreneurship, facilitate the access of finance and markets, and ensure a conducive legal environment for the cooperative development. Lastly, it also provides us the channel for the youth engagement. It engaged the young people in the cooperatives through the entrepreneurship, leadership roles. They may promote the youth-led initiatives and provide a support for capacity building, skill development among the young members of cooperatives. Now we are moving to the role of youth in cooperatives. First off, let's talk about innovation. Ladies and gentlemen, youth bring fresh perspectives, creativity, tech savviness to the table. Imagine a cooperative of farmers that is struggling with the outdated practices. Here come the young guns, armed with the ideas of sustainable farming technology, online marketing tools, marketing application tools to connect them directly to the consumers for their produce. By infusing cooperatives with innovation, youth can help to stay relevant and competitive in the rapidly changing world. Next up is advocacy. Youth are the powerful voices for change. They provide the environmental sustainability, fair trade, social justice among the young cooperative members. In this journey of transformation, I am honored to bear a witness to it all. In the heart of rural India, at a district market cooperative society, when I was a manager, a scene unfolds that captures the essence of cooperative strength and youthful innovation. As I arrived, I struck a contrast. A long queue of farmers waiting for traditional fertilizers, alongside a small group of young farmers promoting biofertilizers. With a contagious enthusiasm, these young farmers share their experiences and benefits of organic farming. Slowly, more and more farmers are drawn into the approach and promise for the healthier crops and greener future. In this movement, the power of cooperation and innovation shines bright. The youth are not just dreaming of the better tomorrow, they are making it happen today. Then there is a capacity building. Let's explore it also with a real incident. In the vibrant tapestry of rural India, a group of young women converge at the doorstep of opportunity. As they approach me, their eyes alight with the hope and anticipation. They want to form a cooperatives. They have exquisite handicrafts that they want to export. In their hands, they hold their fruits of labor. Intricately woven fabrics, delicately embroidered textiles, and handcrafted artifacts that speaks volumes. Their rich cultural heritage and artistic prowess. I pledge my support to their cause. Together we embark into a journey of collaboration and empowerment, and let the foundation of a cooperative for the young women's society is there. This transformed their lives. Now they are exporting more than billions of products in the market. Last but not leadership. Youth are the leaders of tomorrow. But why wait until tomorrow when they can lead today? Cooperatives can create a space for youth to take the leadership roles, whether it's serving on the board of directors, leading community initiatives, or managing cooperative projects. By nurturing the young leaders, cooperatives ensure continuity, diversity, and dynamism in the government structure. So now we have a discussion on the cooperatives. So why we are discussing about the agriculture and the cooperatives here? Because agriculture plays a vital role in the India's economy. More than 55% of the total workforce in India is engaged in agriculture and allied sector activities. The net area sown works out to be around 42.4% of the total geographical area. There are more than 8.5 lakh cooperative units in India with more than 30 million of members. As per the World Cooperative Monitor report, there are many best performing cooperatives in India, such as Amul, an Indian coffee house, and IFCO, that is a fertilizer organization in India. These are the best performing and the model organization globally. As I have already told you, many youth are employed in agriculture. India is the third largest producer of food grains in the world, with a total production of around 3,000 lakh metric ton. But its storage capacity is only 47% of the total food grain production. So now India advances and Ministry of Cooperatives have taken a long step by creating a world's largest food grain storage plan in cooperative sector. I am also witness to one of the development in the farming technology. Through the drone-based sprinkling of fertilizers in the farmlands through cooperatives. Here I want to list out 3 of the many developments that India is going through. In a landmark move, Indian government has recently established the dedicated Ministry of Cooperatives, signaling its unwavering commitment to promoting cooperative enterprises. It's a beacon of hope. It provides the policy support, financial assistance, capacity building, programs to empower the cooperative ventures. Next is the National Agriculture Marketing Federation, that is NAFED. It provides the pillars for the farmers for the fair prices and the market access for their produce. Through strategic procurement operations, NAFED purchases farm products directly from farmers, cutting out the middleman, empowering farmers with a greater control over their livelihoods. But the spirit of cooperation extends beyond the farm gates. Cooperatives also provide the welfare activities through the essential food security requirement for the underprivileged sections of the society. I am also witness to one of the things that is beyond the political and the economic scenario, that is the cultural scenario. Maintaining a biodiversity in the Orchid Park in the Kaziranga, that is in the state of Assam in India, coupled with the cultural programs organized by a group of young cooperatives, not only promotes the environmental conservation, but also enriches their cultural landscape. So from the interview, from my practical lessons, I came to know about the framework and designed this framework for the youth-led initiatives in cooperatives and how it could be provided. That is, the 3 E's are most essential for it. The first one is entrepreneurship. The second one is to educate the youth. And the third one is engagement of the youth. Yes, the education is necessary to make them aware about the cooperative model and its principles, and to make it to the school curricula and the vocational training programs. Capacity building and youth representation and participation also important to leading them to financial literacy and entrepreneurship, making them more environment friendly for the networking opportunities. Youth representation and participation is also important by the structures of the youth committees, advisory boards, youth seats on the board of directors. Last E that we are discussing here in this model is entrepreneurship. Supporting youth-led initiatives with the cooperative startups by providing access to funding resources and technical assistance. The next channel in this framework is the cooperative principles and the networking. There are 7 cooperative principles that is given by the International Cooperative Alliance. That is open and voluntary membership, democratic member control, members' economic participation, community help, cooperation among the cooperatives, and the education training. Now this is the cooperative framework, and later on we move to some statistics. Cooperatives is not a marginal phenomena. More than 12% of the humanity is employed in it. The largest 300 cooperatives have a turnover of more than 2,500 billion of US dollar. And more than 10% of the world's employed population is it. Now the future goals. Yes, the cooperatives have a potential for the youth here. And it's about the International Year of Cooperatives. The United Nations, I'm delighted to share with you an exciting news that the United Nations General Assembly has officially proclaimed 2025 as the International Year of Cooperatives. This declaration highlights the indispensable role that cooperatives play in advancing sustainable development. And what beyond this, We have to move it beyond the traditional cooperatives towards the energy cooperative to bring the renewable energy into community-owned and operated renewable energy projects to reduce the energy efficiency and mitigating the climate change effects. We have to bring digital technology cooperatives, digital inclusion to strive the bridge and the digital divide by providing the access to digital tools, resources, and education to the underserved communities, and international recognition to the cooperatives. Through knowledge sharing, through the knowledge exchange programs, and the collaboration of the cooperatives worldwide to learn from each other's success and challenges. These are the policy influence that need to be made to make the youth-led initiatives further in the cooperatives. Thank you. Thank you so much for the patience listening.
Thank you, Shalini, for finishing just in time. We're not even too late. Let's have a short break. Everybody get a coffee because we will be concluding with our final panel in which will start in about 10 minutes. So yeah, we'll see you then. Thanks.